opaque, translucent, and transparent. These are three terms for three types of materials that every material artist needs to know about. In episode 12 of season 2 of BlenderStory, it's time to create materials for our table lamp model. And guess what? We're going to work with all three types of these materials. For the base part, we'll make a ceramic material. This type of material doesn't let any light pass through, and it's called opaque. For the shade, we're going to create a fabric material. This kind of material lets some light pass through while absorbing the rest, and that's why we call it translucent. Finally, for the bulb itself, we'll create a glass material. Glass allows light to pass through completely, and you can see objects behind it pretty clearly. That's why it's called transparent. To create these materials, we need to learn about two new shaders in Blender: Glass BSDF for the bulb's glass material, and translucent BSDF to make sure light can pass through the shade when the lamp is turned on. As always, don't forget you can download the practice file for free from the link in the description and follow along with me step by step. Alright? No more waiting. Let's jump right in. I've already UV unwrapped this model ahead of time because we've talked enough about UV mapping in earlier episodes of this season. So to keep this video short and focused, I'm not going to show you the UV process again. If you're unsure how to UV unwrap objects like this one, I highly recommend checking out the previous episodes of this playlist. They've got you covered. If you have any questions at all, remember we've set up a Discord channel just for moments like this. You can join for free using the link in the description, ask your questions there, and become part of our awesome community. I'd love to see you there. Now, before we move forward, just two quick tips. First, I removed the solidify modifier from this object. Why? Because, honestly, we don't need to add thickness to this particular piece. It would only increase the topology unnecessarily. Then, I scaled the vertices at the top and bottom sections slightly to improve the overall look of the model. Second, since these objects were originally curves, I right-clicked, went to Convert to, and chose Mesh. This way, I could access the components for UV mapping. That's it. Alright, let's get started by setting up our render engine and lighting. I'll go to Render Properties, switch the render engine to cycles, and change the device to GPU compute to speed up rendering. Then, I'll enable render display from here, click on this little arrow, and turn off scene lights and scene word. Now, I'll select an HDRI image from here, and that's done. Next, let's move our model above the grid so we can work on it more easily. I'll click and drag to select all objects, press G to grab them, then press Z to move them up along the Z-axis. Now, I press 1 on the numpad to switch to front view, and I'll adjust the position carefully to make sure it sits exactly on the grid. Done. Now, let's add a ground plane. I'll press Shift-A, add a plane, then press S to scale it up and make it larger. Perfect. Now comes the fun part, creating materials. I'll move my mouse to this corner, click and drag to split the viewport into two, then change this new section to the shader editor. I'll also press N to hide the side panel for more space. Alright, let's start with this object and create a ceramic material for it. I'll select the object, click New to create a fresh material, and name it something simple like red ceramic. Now I'll choose a color, I'll set it to red for that bold, eye-catching look. And now, it's time to introduce you to a brand new property in the Principled BSDF shader that we haven't used before, coat. Let me open it up for you. Alright, so what does coat do? It's super simple. It simply adds an extra clear, reflective layer on top of your material. Think of it like real-life varnish, glaze, or car paint. This layer gives your material a smooth, shiny finish, making it look much more realistic. Cool, right? So, coat works separately from roughness. That means you can still control how shiny or matte your material looks using roughness, while coat adds an extra reflective layer on top. This makes it perfect for simulating materials like ceramic, where you want that glossy, polished finish. So, I'm going to crank the coat weight all the way up, and look at that. See how it instantly gives our material a more realistic and vibrant shine? Awesome, right? Now, notice that inside the coat section, we also have a roughness slider. This lets us adjust how reflective this extra layer is, separately from the base material. For now, I'll leave it at its default value because it already looks great. But wait, there's more. In coat section, there's also a normal input. This lets us add tiny imperfections to the reflections of the coat layer, making it feel even more realistic. Let me show you how. I'll press Shift-A, add a noise texture, and let's keep its default setting for now. Now let's use a technique we learned in previous episodes to connect it to the normal input. I'll add a bump node, connect the factor to the height, and then connect the normal output of the bump node to the normal input of the code, not the main Principled BSDF normal, but the one inside the code. Alright, now as you can see, the strength value is way too high, so I'll bring it down to something subtle like 0.01, and look at the result. It adds just a tiny bit of distortion to the reflections, making them less perfect and much closer to what you'd see in real life. It's amazing. You can also adjust the roughness if needed, and if you want to take it a step further, you could use a grayscale texture, plug it into the code's roughness input, and add surface imperfections like scratches and dust for even better results. But to keep this video short and simple, I'll skip this part for now. If you've watched the previous episodes of this series, I'm sure you can easily do it yourself, right? Okay, now let's move on to the upper part of this object. We're going to create a metallic material for this part. Hovering Material Properties, I'll click this little plus icon to add a new material slot, click New, and double-click to rename it. Let's call it something like Brass. Right? Now let's assign this material to the faces of the upper section. I'll press Tab to switch to Edit mode, then press 3 on the top row of my keyboard to activate Face Select mode. First, I'll deselect everything by clicking and dragging in an empty area. Then, I'll press C to activate Circle Select, and I'll start selecting the top faces. Once I'm happy with the selection, I'll right-click to exit Circle Select. Now, I'll hold Ctrl and press the plus key on the numpad multiple times to expand the selection until I've selected the entire neck area. Finally, I'll make sure the material is selected and click Assign. Done. Now I'll press Tab to go back to object mode. Okay, let's work on the material itself. First, I'll crank the metallic value all the way up. Now, instead of using a flat, boring color though, let's add some color variation to make it more interesting. Alright, to do this, I'll first add a mix color node. For A, I'll pick this color, and for B, I'll choose this one. Now, if I connect the result of this node to the base color input of the Principled BSDF, you'll see these two colors blend together. If I set the factor to 0, it uses the color from A, and if I set it to 1, it uses the color from B. But here's the thing, we don't want a smooth blend everywhere. Instead, we want some areas to show color A and other areas to show color B. To do that, we just need a grayscale image and connect it to the factor input. This will act like a mask, telling Blender where to use each color. We can easily create this effect using a noise texture node. So, I'll add a noise texture, and with Ctrl, Shift, and click, I'll connect it directly to the surface so we can preview it. If this hotkey isn't working for you, just make sure you've enabled the Node Wrangler add-on in the Preferences under the Add-ons tab. Alright. Now, while the noise texture is selected, I'll press Ctrl-T to automatically add a mapping node and a texture coordinate node, and connect the UV output to the vector input. Next, I'll increase the detail slider all the way up, and I'll also crank up the roughness. Okay, let me zoom in a bit here. Okay, there we go. Now, using this grayscale map, we're going to mix the two colors we created earlier. With Ctrl-Shift-Click, I'll connect the Mix Color node to the surface. Then I'll connect the output factor of the noise texture to the input factor of the Mix Color node. Alright? You can see how the two colors are blending based on the grayscale values of the noise texture. But it's not very noticeable yet. Let's fix that and make the colors stand out more. If I click on the Mix here, you'll see a drop-down menu with different blending modes. Now, if you're familiar with blending modes, you already know where this is going. But if this is your first time hearing about them, don't worry. It's a big topic, and explaining it fully would need its own video. But here's the simple version. Each blending mode combines pixels in a slightly different way. For now, don't stress about understanding the technical details. Instead, just try them out one by one and visually check the result to see which one you like best. That's it. Super easy, right? Okay, to make things even easier, you can hover over the drop-down, hold Ctrl, and scroll with your mouse wheel to quickly switch between modes. This shortcut works everywhere in Blender, and trust me, it's a game changer. Okay, now for this example, I'll select Multiply. Now look at that. Now the two colors are much more distinct, and the blending looks way better. To make the separation even clearer, I'll add a color ramp in between. Okay? By bringing these color stops closer together, I'll increase the contrast between the colors. See how much more noticeable the color variations becomes? Okay, finally, with Ctrl Shift and click, I'll connect the Principled BSDF back to the surface, and boom! Look at how much more realistic and visually appealing our material is now. It's awesome! Alright, now let's add some variation to the roughness of our material. We'll use the same node we already have. I'll select these two nodes, and instead of using Shift-D to duplicate them, I'll press Ctrl-Shift-D. This cool shortcut keeps the connections intact, so the mapping nodes stays linked to the duplicated nodes, and we don't have to reconnect them manually. Alright, now all I need to do is connect the color ramp to the roughness input. Then I'll adjust these color stops to get the result I want. Perfect. Let me zoom in a bit more to fine-tune the placement of these color stops. There we go. It's looking much better now. Okay, to check the final result, I'll press Z and switch to render display. Look at that. The material feels way more interesting and realistic. Remember, if you want even more realism, you can use a grayscale texture map for roughness and add details like scratches or imperfections. But for now, this works perfectly. Alright, let's move on to creating the glass material for the lamp itself. Making realistic glass could easily be a whole video on its own, but here, our goal isn't to dive too deep into complexity. Instead, we're going to create a super simple glass material so you can get comfortable working with nodes and understand the basics. Ready? Let's do it quickly. I'll select the lamp object and create a new material for it. Let's name it something straightforward, like simple glass. Okay, now here's where things get interesting. I'm going to delete the Principled BSDF shader. Yes, delete it. Why? Because Blender has a special shader just for glass, the Glass BSDF. Let's use that instead. I'll press Shift-A, type in glass, and select the Glass BSDF shader. As you can see, it's much simpler than the Principled BSDF. All we need to do is to connect it to the surface input. And just like that, we've created a basic glass material. But wait, if you look closely, something seems off. Instead of looking like glass, it's acting more like chrome. Let me switch to render display by pressing Z, and you'll see the issue persists in cycles as well. Not quite right, is it? Let me hide this object for a moment by selecting it and pressing H. You can see it's behaving almost like a mirror, reflecting everything from the HDRI image. Here's the important thing to remember. For glass to behave realistically, the mesh needs to have some thickness. Without thickness, light doesn't interact with the material properly, which is why it's looking weird. But don't worry, we already know how to fix this. Using what you learned in Season 1, we can easily add thickness with the Solidify modifier. So, I'll select the object, head over to the Modifier properties, click Add Modifier, and choose Solidify from the Generate section. And just like that, as soon as I apply the modifier, you can see the glass material starts reacting to light in a much more realistic way. Easy, right? Okay, I'll press Z and switch back to Solid Display for a moment. Let me zoom in a bit. Now I'll press Alt-Z to enable X-ray mode, and while holding Shift, I'll reduce the thickness in the Solidify modifier just a touch. And there we go. Nice and subtle. If you'd like, you can also change the color of the glass or adjust its roughness right here in the Glass BSDF shader. Super simple. Just a quick note, we could have created this glass material using the Principled BSDF, but since the Glass BSDF is much simpler and gets the job done faster, we went with that instead. Alright, that's it for the glass material. Now let's move on to creating a material for the lampshade. This time, we're going to use the Magic Texture node to create a fabric-like texture. Okay, I'll select the Shade object and create a new material for it. Let's name it something like Shade Fabric. Now I'll press Shift-A, search for Magic Texture, and add it to the node setup. Next, I'll press Ctrl-T to automatically add a mapping node and a texture coordinate node, and connect the UV output to the vector input. Okay, to preview the grayscale data from the Magic Texture, I'll hold Ctrl-Shift and double-click on the node. Now, all I need to do is increase the scale value significantly. For example, let's set it to 500. And just like that, we've got a fabric-like pattern. Let me switch to Material Preview and zoom in a bit to check it out. Okay, looks good so far. Now, I'll drag this material onto this object as well. And done. Alright, next, let's connect this texture to the normal input to give it some surface detail. I'll add a bump node Let me move these nodes around a bit to make some space. Okay, now I'll connect the factor output of the magic texture to the height input of the bump node. Finally, I'll connect the normal output of the bump node to the normal input of the Principled BSDF. Okay, to see the result, I'll hold Ctrl-Shift and click on the Principled BSDF node. Alright, you can already see how the fabric texture is coming to life. Alright, I'll tone down the strength of the bump just a little to make it more subtle. Now, I'll press Z and switch to render display. And there it is. Look how easy it was to create a fabric material using just one node, the magic texture. It's really amazing. Okay, finally, I've tweaked the color a bit to make it more interesting. Let's pick something soft like this warm tone. Perfect. That's it for the shade material. Okay, now imagine this. The lamp in our table lamp is about to turn on. When we light up the bulb, the shade should let some light pass through it, right? But the material we've created so far doesn't have that ability. Looks like it's time to get familiar with lighting in Blender. But don't worry, we're not diving deep into lighting just yet. That's coming up in the next season. For now, we'll take a quick peek at how lighting works and see how we can make our fabric material react more realistically to light. Okay, I'll press Shift-A, go to the Light section, and choose Point Light. Point light is super simple. It emits light evenly in all directions from its center, just like a real-world light bulb. Okay, right now, the light is added at the word origin, which means it's hidden inside the table lamp object. If I press Shift-Z to switch to wireframe view, you can see the light sitting exactly where the cursor is. Okay, let me undo that with Ctrl-Z and switch to the front view by pressing 1 on the numpad. Alright, now I'll press G, then Z, and move the light upward, positioning it just above the lamp object. Don't place the light inside the lamp object because we won't be able to see its effect, unless we adjust the glass material to allow light to pass through it. Since we want to keep things simple for now, let's just position the light slightly above the lamp. Okay, I'll exit wireframe mode by pressing Shift-Z, and even though we've added the light, we still can't see its effect. Why? Because the Scene Lights option is turned off in the viewport shading. So, I'll bring my mouse over here, scroll a bit to reveal the viewport shading options, and turn on Scene Lights. Now look at that. You can see the lights effect in the material preview. Okay, now to adjust the brightness of the light, I'll right-click while the light object is selected and choose Adjust Light Power. If I move my mouse to the right, the light gets brighter, and if I move it to the left, it dims. Once I'm happy with the intensity, I'll click to confirm. Super easy. You can also adjust the light's power by heading to the Object Data properties. Here, you can tweak the power slider to increase or decrease the light's intensity. Both methods do the same thing. Just pick whichever feels more comfortable for you. Okay? Now, one quick note, make sure the light object is selected. Otherwise, you won't see the light properties in this panel. If another object is selected, these settings will be hidden. So make sure the light object is selected so you can see its properties. Okay? For now, I'll set the power to 100 and pick a warm color for the light. Something cozy like this orange-yellow tone. Perfect. Now, I'll press Z and switch to render display. But wait, the lights effect disappears again. Why? Because Scene Lights is also turned off in render display mode. So, I'll enable it here as well. And there we go. You can now see the lights effect in the render display. Great. Now that we've added the light, let's get back to the main question. How do we make the fabric material let some light pass through it? As you can see, the shade material is currently opaque. It doesn't allow any light to pass through. To fix that, we need to give it a translucent quality. Don't worry, it's super easy. Let's do it together. I'll select the shade object and head over to the shader editor. Here I'll press Shift-A, type in translucent, and choose the translucent BSDF shader. You can see that this works just like the glass BSDF or Principled BSDF. It's a simple shader. You can also tell by the green label on the node. In Blender, nodes with green labels are shaders. Now, if I connect the translucent BSDF directly to the surface input, you'll immediately notice how it reacts to light. Look at that. It's letting some light pass through, and the fabric material we created is now glowing where the light hits it. Very cool, right? Okay, so far, we've been mixing textures together. But this time, we need to mix two shaders. To do that, I'll press Shift-A, search for Mix Shader, and place it on this connection. Now, I'll connect the shaders like this, and there you go. With the Factor slider, we can control how much light is allowed to pass through the material. A value of 1 makes the material completely opaque. No light passes through. As I lower the factor towards 0, more and more light is allowed to shine through. Super simple. To make this material even more realistic, we can connect the factor output of the magic texture node to the color input of the translucent BSDF. Let me do that. And here's the result. See how much more interesting it looks now? Amazing. Okay, almost done with the materials for this object. The only thing left is this small part here. For this, I've already appended a plastic material that I created earlier in the chair tutorial and assigned it to the object. If you're not sure how to append materials from previous projects, I highly recommend checking out episode 10 of this season. I explained step by step how to bring materials from other projects into your current scene and reuse them. And if you're wondering how to create this plastic material, take a look at episode 9 of this playlist. I've added links to both videos in the description for easy access. Okay, that's it for the materials of our table lamp. I hope you learned something new and useful in this episode. If you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could give it a thumbs up. It helps the channel grow and ensures more people can discover these tutorials. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care.